General Hospital spoilers reveal that Michael's unexpected and almost dramatic return has shaken Port Charles to its very core. During the time Michael was absent, undergoing treatment in Germany after the explosion that nearly killed him, the entire town had come to believe he wouldn't return anytime soon. Some even thought he would withdraw from all legal battles involving his family to focus on recovery and healing from past traumas. But reality turned out to be quite different. His return was not merely an emotional, impulsive decision. It was the direct result of Jocelyn's quiet but fierce determination. She couldn't stand by and watch her brother be erased from the lives of the very children he had loved and protected with all his heart. Jocelyn had watched as Willow changed bit by bit, moving in with Drew, never mentioning Michael in decisions about Wiley and Amelia. This cold erasure made Jocelyn feel like Michael was being erased from fatherhood, slowly but surely. It wasn't just unfair, it was cruel, and she had to act. With Carly's sharp instincts and her unwavering loyalty to family, Jocelyn began gathering every piece of evidence to prove that Michael was being pushed out of his children's lives, despite having legal rights to be with them. Copies of real estate contracts, photos capturing Willow, Drew, and the kids living like a perfect family, with one glance, could spark rage. But Jocelyn didn't stop there. With relentless determination, she found a way to contact Michael, either through her personal network or possibly by leveraging Jack Brennan and WSB connections, to send the file directly to where he was recovering. She didn't tell Carly, didn't tell Jason, didn't tell anyone, because she knew if they found out, they would stop her. But to Jocelyn, this wasn't just about Carly, or Willow, or Drew. This was about justice. About a father being stripped of his rights. And this was the last chance to set things right. When Michael received that file, everything around him seemed to freeze. The painful therapies, the exhausting recovery, the rare phone calls from family, none of it compared to the gut-wrenching realization that his children were growing up without him, not because he chose to, but because he had been deliberately removed. The sense of betrayal, abandonment, and invisibility burned him from the inside. He couldn't sit still another second. All treatment plans were abandoned. He demanded a flight immediately. And with discreet but efficient help from undisclosed sources, Michael left Baden-Baden aboard a private jet that looked eerily like WSB's specialized aircraft, fueling suspicion that unknown forces were aiding this turbulent return. When Michael walked into the auditorium during the closing night of the nurses' ball, the entire room froze. Willow was speechless. Drew couldn't believe his eyes. Carly could barely breathe. Diane, even with all her legal contingency plans, couldn't hide her shock. But only one person remained calm, her eyes full of meaning, Jocelyn. Because she knew exactly what had happened. She had made it happen. The ripple she started had now become a storm. And she was ready to face the consequences, if it meant Michael could reclaim what he rightfully deserved. From that moment on, the fragile order that Willow and Drew had tried to establish began to crumble. No one could deny Michael's right to be a father, especially when he arrived with documents, evidence, and the resolve of a warrior returning from battle. Carly, who believed she was doing what was best for her son, was now forced to confront the truth. She had been wrong. And it was her daughter who saw it all clearly. Jason, who had once advised Carly to tell Michael the truth, now stood silently by Michael's side, an unshakable pillar. Drew began to feel the weight of the pressure, as Michael's presence became not only a legal threat but also a haunting shadow of a past he couldn't erase. Willow was completely disoriented, realizing that everything she once believed in had suddenly become fragile and breakable like glass. And amid the chaos, Jocelyn stepped out from the crowd, standing silently but proudly behind Michael. She knew she had done the right thing. She hadn't just brought Michael back, she had brought the truth into the light. And even if it shook the entire city, it was the only thing worth fighting for. Now, Jocelyn stands at the most dangerous crossroads of her life. She no longer wants to be a pawn manipulated by the powerful forces behind the WSB. The harsh control, the shadowy limits, and the suffocating restrictions imposed by the organization have made her feel trapped in an invisible cage, every action, thought, and choice monitored, manipulated, redirected along a path she never chose. For far too long, she had strained to please both worlds, remaining loyal to her family while being caught in the machinery of predetermined missions. But now, Jocelyn no longer wants to stay silent. She no longer wants to live in fear or pretend to accept what her heart screams against. If the WSB thought she would always be their obedient puppet, they gravely underestimated her. In the midst of this inner eruption, Jocelyn began planning a counterstrike. She secretly gathered intel, recorded audio clips, uncovered previously untouchable classified files, and started building a sophisticated counter-system that no one in the organization would see coming. But Jocelyn knew she couldn't do this alone. So she reached out to the only person she trusted to walk this unbalanced path with her, Michael. In a series of heavily encrypted messages, she told him everything. How the WSB was quietly tracking her every move, how they forced her to stay silent about their dark operations, and how they were now expanding their reach, not just over her, but over the people she loved, especially Carly and Jason. The truth Jocelyn revealed didn't just shock Michael, it woke him up from a long, idealistic dream. What he once thought was a noble sacrifice by a group sworn to protect the nation now appeared to be a nightmare wrapped in false ideals. Her words, the evidence she provided, everything made Michael realize this was no longer just her battle. It was a real war. A war he had to fight if he wanted to protect his sister, his family, and himself. And that pushed them both into a wild spiral of shifting dynamics, where all old values were questioned, all trust tested, and anyone could become the enemy. From the moment Jocelyn decided to speak out, there was no turning back. The paranoia set in, not just from the WSB, but from her own conscience. Fears of being watched, betrayed, eliminated, or worse, putting her loved ones in danger. But she knew she had no other choice. If she didn't stand up, then who would? If she didn't expose the truth, how many more would be trapped in this authoritarian grip? And if she didn't believe in Michael, who had survived the darkest valleys of his life, then who else could help her escape the hell closing in? In this dark night, Jocelyn is no longer the innocent girl standing on the sidelines. She has stepped into the eye of the storm. And in this chaos, she is the one who lit the fire that could burn everything, or set the prisoners of power free. A new nightmare has begun. But this time, Jocelyn isn't running. She's facing it. She's fighting. And she's ready to break everything to reclaim the freedom that should never have been taken from her. One of the most striking new developments that is truly throwing the entire situation in Port Charles into chaos is not an obvious event, not an explosion, not a murder case. Not a sudden departure, but a subtle yet violent shift occurring within the minds of those who were once regarded as mere pawns in the grand chessboard of powerful underground forces like the WSB. For a long time, Jack Brennan had quietly built an intricate web of power, using promises, secret alliances, fear, and twisted loyalty to control the most important figures in Port Charles's social and familial systems. He manipulated information, monitored behavior, influenced choices, and extinguished any spark of rebellion before it had the chance to ignite. But something happened that Brennan never saw coming. Jocelyn was no longer the naive girl who blindly believed in the ideals he had painted, and Michael, who had once given up everything to focus on recovery, had returned with a quiet fury and a heart burning for truth. It was Jocelyn who sparked the change. After years of living in the shadow of her mother, the organization, and invisible constraints, she felt like she was suffocating. She couldn't breathe knowing that every action was being watched. Every thought was being steered, and her future had seemingly already been determined by people she had never given permission to. The WSB didn't just control national security, they controlled minds, consciences, and truth. And that was unacceptable. But what truly pushed her to rise up wasn't her personal suffocation, it was the fact that her mother, Carly, was also being tightly held within that authoritarian grip. Brennan had found ways to manipulate Carly through loyalty, gratitude, and guilt. He made her believe that sacrifice was necessary. That silence was the right path, that guarding secrets was the only way to keep the family safe. But Jocelyn saw something Carly didn't. She was slowly losing herself. And that was what made Jocelyn act. No longer silent, no longer hesitant, she reached out to Michael, the only person she knew was smart enough, strong enough, and calm enough to grasp the gravity of what was happening. Through a series of secret exchanges, Jocelyn revealed to Michael the entire truth, how Brennan used the WSB to suppress dissent, how he monitored Carly, and how he even threatened Jason if he dared go against orders. But most importantly, something few dared consider. Brennan was slowly rebuilding a system of social control in Port Charles, starting by dominating influential figures like Carly, Jason, Sonny, and now Michael himself. With the information Jocelyn provided, Michael realized this was no longer a personal matter. This was a systemic war, a silent battle that could forever change the power structure of the city. He was no longer just a father fighting for custody. He had become the unofficial leader of an uprising against the WSB, against Brennan, and against the seemingly unshakable structures of power. And in that rise, he wasn't alone. He had Jocelyn, a young woman with intelligence, boldness, and unshakable loyalty, at his side. He had Diane, who knew the law but also knew that laws mean nothing if the truth remains hidden. And more than anything, he had Carly, his mother. A fierce woman who had walked dangerous paths to protect her family. Though she wasn't ready yet, something inside her had begun to awaken. The realization that she needed to break free from the chains Brennan had placed on her. However, freeing Carly from Brennan's grip wouldn't be easy. She had long grown accustomed to secrecy, to accepting agreements for the sake of family, and to silently enduring pressure. But Jocelyn knew that to win, she and Michael couldn't just fight Brennan, they had to wake Carly up. She could no longer be a pawn, a messenger, or an unwilling keeper of secrets. Carly had to choose a side. And time was running out. As Brennan intensified his pressure, assigning people to follow Jocelyn, sending cryptic warnings to Carly, and even orchestrating false emergencies to spread confusion, the new alliance between Michael and Jocelyn was forming a carefully crafted counterattack. They knew that if Brennan was allowed to continue unchecked, not just their family, but the entire city would fall under the control of invisible hands. And so, they had no choice but to act. For the first time in years, Carly, the woman used to being in control, was being pulled out of her comfort zone by her own children to confront everything she had silently accepted. And for Brennan, the war would no longer be in the shadows, it would explode. Jocelyn was walking a path with no return. Her decision to betray the WSB by exposing its darkest secrets marked the end of every old alliance that had ever existed. After years of being bound by vague contracts, sweet promises veiled with threats, and a network of control so refined no one dared question it, Jocelyn was done. She wouldn't be a keeper of secrets anymore. When she chose to break the silence, it wasn't just a personal act, it was a direct strike at the very pillars of power that had operated behind the curtain of Port Charles for years. She revealed covert WSB operations, personnel trades, conspiracies to ignore crimes in the name of balance, and the truth about how they had manipulated generations of her family, Jason, Sonny, and even Carly. It was all documented, encrypted, and sent to a chain of anonymous addresses, the first recipient being Michael himself. Michael, just returned to the heart of the storm, never expected the first attack on Brennan to come from his own sister. When he opened the dossier Jocelyn sent, the pages, images, audio clips, and leaked conversations sent a chill through his blood. Everything Brennan had told Carly, everything he made her believe was, for protection, for the greater good, just temporary, was unmasked as layers of calculated deceit meant to turn her into a pawn for the organization's interests. Michael wasn't just angry. He was furious at the realization that his mother, the strongest and most independent woman he knew, had been trapped in an invisible cage built by a man she once trusted. And in that moment, Michael made a decision no one could stop. He would tell Carly the truth, even if it put them all in danger. even if it meant declaring war on the WSB. He couldn't let his mother live in the dark one more day. And then that moment came. Michael faced Carly and handed her the sealed file prepared by Jocelyn. Carly's eyes filled with confusion. Her heart raced as she opened each page, read every code, listened to recordings of Brennan issuing cold commands, bargaining, threatening. Everything crumbled. The wall of justification she had built to explain her silence shattered. Carly couldn't breathe. The things she told herself were, for the kids, for Jason, for Michael's safety, were exposed as lies built by someone else. The shock didn't just wound her, it changed her. Michael's decision to reveal the truth triggered a new and uncontrollable shift. Brennan, once confident in his ability to control every narrative, suddenly realized the game had changed. He lost Carly, the keystone in his plan to maintain a grip on Port Charles. He lost Jocelyn, once groomed to inherit the old order. And worst of all, he lost Michael, the man he underestimated as a weak businessman, who now stood as the unexpected leader of a true resistance. The entire city trembled as the first leaks of the truth behind WSB began spreading through anonymous channels. Journalists once silenced now received information they couldn't ignore. Powerful figures began to feel uneasy. Hidden collaborators started backing away. But the most terrifying thing was Brennan himself began to feel haunted. He couldn't sleep. Knowing everything he built was falling apart, and not because of traditional enemies, but because of the very people he once trusted, once thought he controlled. Carly, once under his protection, was now leading the charge with her children. Jocelyn, the girl who once called him Uncle Brennan with admiration, was the one who struck the first blow. Every minute, the paranoia grew. Brennan began suspecting everyone in his inner circle. He ordered counterinvestigations into his own team. He trusted no one. His once meticulous plans now changed daily in panic. He knew, just one more recording, one more leak, and he would lose everything. And in that growing fear, something began to take root in Brennan that had never existed in his entire career. He was afraid. Afraid of a Jocelyn no longer bound. Afraid of a Michael no longer limited. Afraid of a Carly fully awakened. And while Brennan sank into obsession, Carly, Jocelyn, and Michael were preparing their next move. This war is no longer a secret. It has begun, openly, directly, and without mercy. The WSB is no longer untouchable. And Port Charles will never again be a city under control. Everything has changed. Forever. Carly is in a state of complete shock after facing the harsh truth. Jack Brennan, the man she once trusted, compromised, and sacrificed her personal freedom to work with, is the most ruthless traitor. She always believed that everything Brennan did was for the greater good, protecting the country, maintaining stability, and keeping the people she loved safe. But now, when confidential documents from Jocelyn and Michael expose layer upon layer of the naked truth, Carly realizes that it was all just the perfect cover for a power machine that operates on control, deception, and betrayal. Brennan not only lied to her, but also took advantage of that trust to stifle her freedom, to turn her into a tool to serve his and WSB's own interests. And the moment she realized that, was the moment a different person in Carly awakened. No longer a forgiving mother, no longer an accepting woman, but a true warrior, ready to destroy everything that had ever held her back. The madness wasn't in the information she'd received, it was in the rage that was simmering inside Carly. She felt betrayed to the core. Knowing that for years she'd been led down a wrong path, losing time, losing control, and almost losing relationships with those she loved most. Brennan's manipulation of her trust as a weapon, turning her into a cog in the invisible chain of control of the WSB, was something Carly couldn't forgive. The shock didn't break her, it made her rebel. And when someone like Carly Spencer rebels, there are no limits to what can hold her back. She began quietly gathering evidence, reconnecting with old allies, those who had warned her but she had ignored. She contacts Jason, who knows the nature of the WSB better than anyone. She meets with Diane in closed-door meetings to develop a legal strategy. But really it's to tear down every brick Brennan and his organization used to build an impenetrable wall. Carly doesn't just want to leave the WSB, she wants to destroy it. And Brennan is her first target. She won't strike back, she won't retreat quietly. Carly wants him to know that the woman he once underestimated, once believed easy to control, is now the one turning the tables. This marks one of the craziest twists in Port Charles history. The events that have happened in succession, from Michael coming back undercover to Jocelyn counterattacking with inside information, now culminate in Carly declaring war on him. A new set of disasters is taking shape, not bombs, not assassinations, but the collapse of a seemingly impenetrable system from within. When Carly attacks, she targets not just Brennan, but the entire power structure he has built. Secret files leak. Media channels become suspicious, former WSB collaborators retreat in panic, and key figures in the organization begin to feel unsafe. Brennan, once the man with the intelligence network at his fingertips, is now prey. He can no longer call an emergency meeting and defuse a crisis with a few words of direction. He can't silence Carly. He can't manipulate Jocelyn, and he has lost all control over Michael. He is surrounded on all sides, legally, in the media, and from the very people who were once his strategic assets. And what scared Brennan more than anything was that Carly was no longer fighting for herself, she was fighting for a generation that had been manipulated by the WSB. And she didn't intend to stop until Brennan and his entire organization were down. The disaster was brewing, not just a threat. It was a political, media, and moral storm that was sweeping across the land. And the person standing in the center of that storm was not an intelligence director or a senior officer, but a mother. A woman who had been pushed around, now awake and no longer willing to be silent. Carly Spencer was no longer a victim. She was the nightmare that was being unleashed on Brennan and the WSB. And it was only just beginning.